Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that you have a child that's 16 years old. She's independent, so living on her own now. You get a phone call from her employer. She says, "Hey, you should go down and check on your daughter." So you go to her apartment, and the apartment manager lets you in. You search the apartment, and you find your daughter deceased in the bathtub. She's blindfolded, she's gagged, and she's mostly submerged in water. But the horrifying act of you as a parent finding your child dead in a bathtub, to me, is with the dad of 5 kids, I can't think of anything worse. But it does get worse. Imagine waiting 39 years to actually get answers on who killed your daughter. That's basically the scenario that Detective Hilary Gordon and I are talking about today. I'm so grateful for you as a listener and a viewer. So definitely subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so you don't miss an episode. But I especially want to welcome our guest, Detective Hilary Gordon, today. Hilary, welcome to the program, and appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So, Hilary, you used to work for Salt Lake City PD.
I did.
You were a detective for what, close to 20 years, right?
About 17 of the 20 years I was a detective.
Okay. Well, so you've seen it all.
Seen a lot. Yeah, seen a lot.
And I'm glad you're up in Washington now, and things are a little slower for you. But
oh yeah, it's great being a little slowed down now.
yeah, well, beautiful part of the country. So, when you were with Salt Lake City PD, how did you get assigned to? Now, some people call her Lecia, some people call her Sharon, but which one?
She went by Lecia.
Okay.
So I'll call her Lecia.
So Lecia Shollmeyer's 16 years old in 1979, living in an apartment complex up in...
Hold on a second. It's 1977.
Oh, 1977. All right. Well, that's even better. Seems that, especially with the news that just broke today, we'll talk a little bit about that, that case in Aurora, Illinois. But seems like the 70s, there were a ton of really nasty dudes running around. Seems like the number of killers, like serial killers, it just seems that back then it was a lot more feasible to do than it is today. But
yeah, I would agree. I mean, serial killers were, there was a lot going on. You had Ted Bundy that also came through Utah, right, in the 70s and so forth. So yeah, there was a lot going on back then without a lot of technology or advancements in science to help.
Yeah, well, DNA wasn't even on the scene yet, so these guys could go into, and if they were wearing gloves, there were not a chance of getting any kind of fingerprinting, and so they're obviously this killer that killed Lecia, he wasn't even concerned about leaving fingerprints from what I understand. But so talk to me about how you got assigned to Lecia's case and where you took it from, the day that you found out you were in charge of this cold case.
Okay. Yeah, we had a cold case grant from the Department of Justice because we have quite a few cold case homicides and missing persons cases. And I was really interested in Lecia's case because I knew the owners of the restaurant that she worked for back in the 70s. And so I'm actually friends with that family. And when I saw that we had the cold case grant and that cold case was unsolved, I was very interested in learning more about that case. So I asked for the case to be assigned to me. It had been assigned to several other detectives previously. And so I took the case on and just delved into every single possibility, read every single document associated with it, and tried to figure out a way of looking at the case from a different angle that hadn't been looked at before.
Sure. So talk our audience through, like, if you were just trying to explain this case from the very beginning. And I explained a little bit, kind of the gist of what happened, but
Yeah.
uh,
And so
talk us
Lecia,
through, talk us through what happened, really.
okay. Yeah, Lecia, she was a very independent 16-year-old. She wanted to live on her own. She didn't want to live at home anymore. So her mother, Sally, wanted to still, have a connection with her daughter and be, a part of her life, even though, Alicia's 16 and wanting to move out, she was pretty advanced for her age as far as maturity and so forth. So she got an apartment in downtown Salt Lake in what we consider the Avenues area, which is really close to the central downtown area of Salt Lake. And um, she got a job at Lamb's Restaurant, and uh, she was just, your typical 16-year-old, just living life, hanging out with friends, doing, whatever a 16-year-old does. But she also was living, in her own apartment and, had to pay for rent. And, back then there wasn't, she didn't have a phone in her apartment. There weren't cell phones, like I think her biggest possession or biggest prize to her that she had was a stereo. So she used to go out and party with her friends and work and just lived a typical life. So, I mean, it's really sad because that soon came to an end. Um, when she lived downtown there, she would walk to work. She didn't have a car. She would work her shifts. She would go home. Um, and then one day she didn't show up for her shift. And her supervisor, the supervisor in charge of the waitresses, Estelle was her name, called Sally and said, "This is really unusual that Lecia wouldn't show up for shift. She's not like that. Can you go check on her and see what's going on?" So Sally went to her apartment and knocked on the door, and nobody answered. The door was locked. So she left a note on the door for Lecia to call her. And Sally returned home, and a couple hours later, she hadn't heard from her. And so she decided to go back. And when she went back to her apartment, the note was still there. No one was answering the door. So she went to the apartment manager to ask him if he would open the door for her so she could go in and check to see, what was going on, if she was home, if she wasn't. And that's when she discovered her deceased in the bathtub.
So she was face down in the bathtub.
She was face down in the bathtub, and there was there was some water in the bathtub, but the bathtub in the initial discovery of her and when the detective showed up, they noted that over a period of time, the water wasn't holding tight in the bathtub, so it was probably higher than what they found her in, which was just a couple of inches. And so they did a test on the bathtub, and yeah, it was not holding water 100%. But she was
Hmm.
found face down in a couple inches of water.
Okay.
Yeah,
And other than the blindfold and the gag, she didn't have anything on.
she did. She had a rope on one leg and a nylon tied on the other leg.
Okay.
So
And my understanding is the apartment was pretty trashed.
yeah, it looked like somebody had gone through it. There were, dresser drawers open, stuff like her purse strap had broken and was laying on the floor and dumped out. and there were some clothes on the floor. And the first thing I noticed in looking at the photographs is that the blind and the gag that was used on her matched the clothing that was laying on the floor, that looked like they were like two sort of halter tops that had been ripped and used for the blind and the gag.
Now, out of your experience, why, especially with a victim that the suspect may know, why there's some psychological reasons that they will actually blindfold and gag a victim. I mean,
Yeah, they don't.
it's not just so that she won't be screaming out.
Right. Yeah, they know that this person will recognize them. It's they don't want to get caught, and so they're gonna not only try to quiet them, but then they want to try and blindfold them so that they can't identify them. In this particular case, it's interesting because the killer obviously saw an opportunity to go in and assault or what have you to the victim, but he didn't go prepared. Um, and what I mean by that is when you have somebody who's preparing to commit a crime, they'll usually bring stuff with them. They may bring a knife, they may bring a gun, they may bring um, whatever they need to subdue their victim. But in this case, they used the knife, a kitchen knife from Lecia's apartment, to obviously get compliance. And that knife was found in the bathroom, not in the tub, but next to the tub. They used her clothing as the the gag and the blindfold. So it's not an organized person who has gone into that apartment to commit the crime.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see that, it's almost like a crime of opportunity, or just not a really well thought out crime. But once he got in there, he realized that this person's going to know who I am, so I need to go ahead and blindfold them.
Okay. So the apartment's all just trashed. She's deceased in the bathtub. Any, especially once you actually caught the perpetrator, was there any indication why he filled the bathtub up? Did he suspect that his fingerprints might be on her? Or again, in 1977, the DNA wasn't even a factor back then. So I don't know if he had that much foresight, or has he ever mentioned that?
He has never mentioned why he put her in the bathtub. She would have had a hard time breathing anyway. Not that he would have known that, but she couldn't breathe out of her nose very well. So with the gag in her mouth, she would have had a hard time breathing. But I think that, obviously putting her face down in the water, maybe he thought that, it was going to drown her. Maybe he thought that this was his solution to how he would kill her. He had a knife. He obviously didn't use that on her. Obviously that was for compliance on her part, but I don't know what went through his head in putting her in the water, other than perhaps wanting to drown her, but she was already probably.
So what was the ultimate cause of death?
The ultimate cause of death was strangulation, I believe. But she couldn't. There wasn't anything around her neck. And I don't recall the ME's report saying that there was water in her lungs. I think that she essentially suffocated from what took place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he had his hand on her neck or any of those sorts of things, but she couldn't breathe through her nose. And with the gag, ultimately suffocation is what caused her death.
Yeah. So not only was she sexually assaulted, but I can't think of a worse way to go than suffocation. I mean, that's like a slow. There was a case in Florida that I remember. The victims, they were an older couple, and some group of women actually broke into their apartment and taped them up with duct tape. And they put duct tape around their face as well. And they must have put so much around their mouth and nose that ultimately the couple suffocated. And I don't even think they meant, I think they were just meant to restrain them and then kind of blindfold them so they couldn't see. But ultimately they killed them because they suffocated them. And
Yeah.
I just think that'd be just a horrible way to go.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, not only would you be absolutely terrified after, and I mean, especially with Lecia, I mean, I don't mean to be graphic, but can you imagine being 16, someone breaks into your apartment and not in a loud way. I mean, this guy had the key to her apartment. He goes in, he finds her, he subdues her with a knife, threatens her, blindfolds her, gags her, rapes her, and you're suffocating the whole time. And I just can't imagine the fear that she was experiencing. That's got to be horrific.
Yeah. Well, and I remember seeing the episode on Forensics Files 2. It's called Knots, by the way, for any of you that want to go on and actually see how the Forensics Files put together that whole story. And it's, I think both you and the other detective in describing everything just did a fantastic job. But the way that it happened, I think is just unbelievable. Like you said, the apartment manager, he was 19 at the time, right?
I think he was 20. Yeah.
Okay. But still, I remember when they found him in Florida, which, by the way, just kind of a side note, there's a weird connection between murdering people in Salt Lake City and then finding them in Florida, 30 years later. So it's just one of those bizarre things where the Crystal Beslanowicz case, they found the perp in Florida living in his mom's house in Sarasota, 20 years after he killed Crystal Beslanowicz. So this is kind of the same way.
Yeah.
Not Sarasota, but in Florida nonetheless. Every time I'm down in Florida and I'm with my friends down, or detectives or anybody else down, I'm like, you guys are surrounded by murderers down here, man. It's it's brutal. So anyway, you were you part of the interview process with McCabe?
I was not. I was not a part of the interview process. I worked on the case itself for about a year, and in working the case, there were a lot of people fixated prior on the case to a associate of hers that lived in the building, and they really thought that it was this associate, this guy that wanted to date her that she didn't want to date. So when I looked at the case, and I knew that direction had not panned out for many years on numerous different levels, I wanted to try and look outside the box to figure out what haven't we looked at here. And the thing that stuck out to me the most, it was like just glaring to me personally, was that this was sort of a crime of opportunity. This was somebody who, had the gall enough to go in, use a kitchen knife, use her stuff to subdue her, and the door was locked. So my first thought was, who has a key to her apartment? Who would have the access to go in and do this and then lock the door when they left? And my very, very first thought was, it has to be the apartment manager or his roommate. They have keys to the entire building. And so when I looked up where either of them were, it was a little difficult, because back in the 70s, they didn't write great reports. They didn't take date of births. In fact, they called him Pat McCabe, and I believe they just listed an age of 20. There was no social security number, no, anything to really identify him further. And so I did run a nationwide search and found, I think there were 5 Patrick McCabe's in the United States that were approximately 20 or so uh, during that time frame. And one of them obviously was the Patrick McCabe in Florida, and the roommate was in another state with a much more difficult name to so you could narrow it down a little bit easier. But uh, when it came to trying to figure out which one it was, it could have been basically any one of these 5. And then when we got the hit, yeah, it was the Florida guy. And Corden Parks, who's a detective with Salt Lake City, he's been in homicide for so long, more than 20 years, and he's just an amazing detective. And I learned so much from him. And he was in charge of the cold case grant, so he's the one who went down to Florida to try and get a confession from Patrick McCabe, and also as part of a requirement when we get a hit, we have to get their DNA to kind of double verify that it's the correct DNA. And so when he went down to Florida and connected with the sheriff's office in the area where Patrick McCabe was living, he also had a search warrant for his DNA.
So the DNA that was collected at the crime scene, how did that come about, and what was the process of actually getting the profile?
So the DNA, when I was looking through the photographs and I noticed the 2 halter tops that had been used on her person for the blindfold and the gag, and I noticed that they were laying on the floor in the photos, I went to our evidence and I had them pull the clothing and stuff that had been gathered and been stored in our evidence for almost 40 years. The 2 pieces, the two halter tops, the blindfold and the gag, were bagged individually. And when I opened the bag to see what it looked like, I was like, "Yep, that's the gag, that's the blindfold." And I thought an M-back would work if whoever tied the knots, because they basically put the blindfold on and tied knots at the back, the gag tied knots at the back. Whoever tied it, unless they were wearing gloves, is gonna leave their DNA. So when I saw that they were still uh, in one piece, I was pretty excited because I thought maybe we can use an M-back and figure out who tied these knots. Another thing I had to look at as well is I looked at the photographs from the medical examiner's office. And back in 77, I was really hoping that they used gloves. I mean, I'm sure they didn't think much about leaving their DNA. More of like wearing gloves for protection from bodily fluids and so forth. And so I was thrilled to find that they did wear rubber gloves, and they cut the blindfold off and the gag to the side of the knots so that they didn't disturb the knots at all, which was great. So I requested that our crime lab do an MVAC on the knots themselves. And so Teresa Chop was with our crime lab, and she was trained to use the MVAC system, which Salt Lake City owned an MVAC system. And I mean, I'm sure your viewers know what the MVAC system is, but the only way I can really describe it to other people who don't know is it's like a big vacuum, and it you use a saline on it, and it correct me if I'm wrong, and then it sucks everything off of the item like a vacuum would, and it goes into a filter, and then that filter was sent to the state crime lab to be processed to see what kind of DNA, if any, was there. And the full profile came back as Patrick McCabe from Florida, who was a registered sex offender in Florida for raping a girl in 1999 that was, I think, approximately the same age as Lecia was when she was murdered.
Yeah, we describe the MVAC a lot as like a medical grade carpet cleaner.
Yeah.
So yeah, that fluid that's sprayed down combined with the vacuum creates this little mini hurricane down there on the surface, and that just enables a lot of DNA to be pulled up that isn't going to come up using any other method. And so
yeah, and
especially touch DNA is
it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And I actually, for chain of custody and so forth, I was there, opened, the bag that had the halter tops and so forth, and watched our crime lab tech do the MVAC. And then I collected the filter from her and booked it into evidence, and then took it to the state crime lab. So I watched the process in person, and it's such a sensitive test, and I was just so grateful that all of the people involved in this case for the almost 40 years that it was going on didn't contaminate anything, that the people who transported Lecia to the medical examiner's office didn't contaminate anything. Nobody just Nothing was contaminated, and it just worked like magic. It was just, there was no other profile on there. There was no other, anything that we would have had to explain away. So it was awesome.
Yeah, that's really, if you think about that, and this is prior to DNA, nobody even knew about DNA back then. And you think about what the technology is going to be like for us 20, 30 years from now. And what are we doing right now that may or may not, I mean, we don't know, but maybe it's going to contaminate something in the future, or alter the way it's, there's some kind of electronic signature or something. I mean, we just have no idea.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where those guys were back then in 77 when they're collecting this evidence. So the sheer fact that there was no contamination, there was no issues with it that would have caused the suspect to maybe be able to throw that evidence out, or the defense. It's what a great story, because the fact that there wasn't any other contamination in there is just an absolute miracle. Just love it.
Another fascinating part about this case in general was that in the late 70s, and I can't remember exactly what date, I don't know if it was from 75 or 76 or something like that, like somewhere in the 70s until 1983, Utah had a statute of limitation on homicide. And so this fell into that category. And the statute of limitation on homicide was 4 years. And so as I'm looking at this case, and I'm hoping there's no contamination, that the process is going to work, that we've kind of ruled out any other individuals that were known to her in like a friend capacity, or somebody who wanted to date her or something like that. Once we were able to rule, kind of those things out over the 40 years, or I see that the detectives before me ruled those things out, I started to notice that, the bindings are there, the photographs are there, and they were done well enough to show the clothing on the ground that matched. But the fascinating part was the statute of limitations. It really blew my mind. I was like, how can there be a statute of limitations of 4 years on any homicide ever? Like, just why? I mean, that's just so, it blew my mind. So as I was working on it, I just thought, oh God, I really hope this doesn't turn into we can't prosecute because of the statute of limitations problem. But what I learned in speaking to the district attorney's office and other people, Cordon Parks, the other detective, and so forth, is that during that time frame when there was the 4 years statute of limitation problem, is that if the person left the state, then the time stopped. So if they left for a month and came back for a month, and then left for 2 months and came back for 2 months, anytime that they were in Utah, it would start and stop. And if during that time that they came back and forth, it accumulated in total to 4 years, then that statute of limitations would apply. And so I felt like I was really nervous about, who is this killer? Have they been in Utah? Did they stay? Did they not? I mean, is this statute of limitations going to screw us in getting some justice for this family and this victim? And ultimately, we found that Patrick McCabe, a few months after Lecia was murdered, moved to Arizona, and then he moved to Florida, and he never came back to the state of Utah. And another thing that we weren't able to prove, because obviously DNA wasn't thought of then and so forth, in the way that we do now, was whether or not she was actually raped. And that would be an aggravating circumstance that could override the statute of limitations. And they did a Code R kit, which is a sex assault kit on her at the time that she was at the medical examiner's office. But there wasn't really a lab that you could send that to. They sent it to somebody up at the University of Utah, and I can't even remember what the department was called because it doesn't even exist anymore. And that department would look for spermicide. But in her case, it was inconclusive. So they couldn't say yes or no whether or not spermicide was present. And he actually was the one who confessed to raping her and said that was the whole reason that he entered her apartment. He wanted to rape her. And then once he got in there and realized she could identify him and so forth, what in his mind, what choice do I have? I need to, she's going to identify me. I'm going to be in trouble. And so I think that he didn't play it through well enough in his mind. He just really, he was focused on raping her and then killing her because she could identify him. And it just made so much sense to know that not only is the DNA is so much more advanced, but it just really made a lot of sense of when he said that. You could already see when you were looking at the case that this was a kind of more spontaneous thing for him. He wanted to have sex with her. He wanted to do these things, and then, oh, what am I going to do? And then, moves and goes and does the same thing to somebody else, and why he did or didn't take the life of the person in Florida that he ultimately was convicted for the sex offense for. I don't know. I don't know if there was any sort of, thought process on his part, but I really don't think that he has the feelings to, I don't think he's sorry. I don't think he regrets any of it. So.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to fathom really, the obsession that he must have had with her to actually use his apartment key and break into her house. And then I think when Gordon was interviewing him and he was confessing, he said, yeah, once I actually raped her, then it was kind of able to come to his senses. I don't know what kind of how that goes. Like you just have no ability to have rational thought until you're done raping her. And then you realize, oh crap, this girl knows who I am. And so I got to kill her.
Yeah.
That's just I don't know. I think a lot of those pedophiles and these rapist types, that the desire and the push and the obsession and all of these deranged thoughts that go through their heads in order to, have this sexual release is just so overriding any other rational thought to me. It's I not well, I hope, and maybe you'd have a little more insight on this one, but I would hope that's not a very prominent gene that is causing some of these people to be just complete mental cases. But
Yeah.
hopefully,
I mean, it's definitely an obvious lack of impulse control on top of a lot of other things. There's this driving force for them for whatever reason to engage in that sort of activity and not be able to. I don't know if they don't care about the consequences or if it's kind of a game as far as like I'm going to try to get away with this for as long as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But with Patrick McCabe in particular, I really despise him for a couple of reasons. One, he took the life of a very innocent 16-year-old girl that just, was just living her life without any regard for her as a person at all. The second thing is him showing her mom, walking her up to the door, opening the door, knowing that she's going to go find her daughter in that condition. And then having the audacity to say, well, yeah, let's go down to my apartment and call the police and wait with the police or wait with her at his apartment till the police get there. I mean, I don't know. You gotta be something else to do that. And then I also know that in speaking with Gordon about his, Patrick McCabe's confession, is that essentially, when Gordon knocked on his door, and can you imagine you or I or any normal person, someone knocks on your door from another state, a police detective, and they want to talk to you and they're going to bring you down to the sheriff's office to have a conversation that you don't have any questions about it. Oh, okay. You already know. Know he knows.
Yeah.
And one of his questions after everything was said and done was, does the Utah State Prison provide health care? He didn't care about anything else but himself.
Yeah.
From start to finish, from his lack of impulse control and I don't know, psychosis and in doing what he did to her, all the way to the day that he went to prison. His concern was for himself, that he was gonna, he was getting older, he was not doing well, health wise, and his concern was, okay, well, I'm kind of screwed. They know I did this. Am I going to get medical when I get to prison? Just, it blows my mind, the mentality.
Well, you said in 1991, I think you said he had served for a different sexual assault.
I think it was 1999. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. 99. Okay. So he'd already been in the prison system, so he's familiar with it. And so I'm sure he's just like, well, they caught me finally. And so now I just got to figure out what the next 20 years is going to be like, I guess. But yeah, I reflect back on the thought that when Lecia's mom went down and asked him to let her into the apartment to go check on her daughter, the fact that he was there, and my understanding is he actually stuck around and he's the one that called the police, but he stuck around and gave a statement. I mean, the cojones on that kid, a 20-year-old kid, to actually not only let her mom find her daughter, knowing what she was going to find, and then be able to stay calm enough to stick around and give a statement to the police.
Yeah.
Jeez.
It was interesting because when I got the letter from the state crime lab showing me that the MVAC worked, and that the DNA found was Patrick McCabe's. Um, I was sitting in the middle of my squad room, and I opened the letter, and I was so thrilled. Like I was like literally jumping up and down and saying, we solved this case. And everybody, all the detectives I worked with we were just like just through the roof happy. And then these thoughts of, you know, how, it's his DNA on there. How do I prove that? I hope he didn't go in and touch her body after the fact, and that's how his DNA got on there, or any of those sorts of things. So I had to come up with a way to talk to Sally, Lecia's mom, and ask her questions about when she found her body, which was, uncomfortable and sad,
Yeah.
to bring up that kind of stuff with her. But I think it was within a week I had an appointment to go and talk to her at her house, and had to walk her through that, and without letting on why I needed to know whether or not Patrick McCabe touched her body when Sally found her dead in the bathtub.
Mm.
And you know, come to find out while interviewing Sally that no, he opened the door, he stood at the front door and let her go in and find her, and then when she came out, offered to take her down to his apartment to call 911. But I was also grateful that he didn't go in and touch her, and that she could testify to that. Say, no, he didn't touch her. I went in and found her. And at the same time, to think of what a sick individual he has to be, and had to have been, to allow all that to happen. It's just,
Uh-huh.
it blows my mind.
Yeah. So once you were able to actually tell Lecia's family that you got him, what was that experience like?
It was Detective Parks who was able to actually relay that information, and also I have met with Leisha's family after the fact. When we were doing there, we did a case that spoke about this case. The first time I saw them was in New York at the case with Paul Zahn, and they were it was Sally and Leisha's sister. I think her name is Bridget, and we all met at the studio, and it was just really heartfelt, and um, I cannot tell you the gratification that I felt to be able to kind of see them full circle after he had pled, and everything was done, and talk to Sally, and you know talk to her about all of the issues around the case, and not have to, like, oh, I can't say this or I can't say that. And it was just really nice to talk to her, and she gave me a really big hug, and she said, I didn't realize what you were getting at when we had that conversation, that you wanted to see if he had touched her. And so she said she was just, in her mind, she had already came up with a scenario to close it out that she could deal with, of what happened to Lecia. And when I called her and told her that we had, that we knew who did this, and I needed to talk to her, um, I think that she really had she was kind of shocked. Really had a, I'm not sure what to think about this type of moment, but being able to talk to her, and Bridget, about a year or two later, uh, it was nice. It was just really, I don't know, it just come full circle and feel like, I was a part of bringing justice to Lecia, and bringing some closure to the family, and getting this absolute pile of garbage off the road. and in prison was like, I don't think that I could explain the feeling of gratitude that I have for the MVAC, the crime lab people, the work of all the other detectives, the full circle of being able to tell a family that you've finally solved something that they've been, wanting answers to for so long, and just the opportunity to be able to work on a case that not a lot of people get to do. It's a once in a lifetime thing for sure.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, you hope so.
Yeah.
But sadly, there's still enough dirt bags out there that haven't been caught yet. And so that's
Oh,
why
yeah.
we're so grateful for people like you that actually are out there. I can't think, Hillary, of a more thankless job. I mean, I served in the military, and there's a lot of people that don't really appreciate the military as much as they probably should. But law enforcement, holy cow, especially in today's society, it's one of the most thankless jobs that I've ever seen. And it's, yeah, some of the responses that I get on some of the different episodes that we post, especially if we're talking positive about law enforcement. I don't know. It just seems that there's a segment of society that goes out of their way to try to demonize cops, like society would even survive a week without them. You know?
Yeah.
I, but that experience you had with Lecia's family, um, uh, once you got to wonder how long it took them to actually accept that Lecia was gone, to and then kind of try to move on with their lives. Whether it was a decade, or I don't know that a mom can ever overcome that, but I'm sure the feeling of gratitude and I don't think there's any really such thing as closure, but at least to know that you guys never gave up on her daughter's case. I'm sure that was an amazingly fulfilling moment.
It was absolutely incredible. And for the people who don't like law enforcement, I get it. I mean, especially in today's, age, and, the stuff that happened with George Floyd, that's just despicable. I get it. I understand why people don't like law enforcement, but I hope that people also understand that, yeah, they're absolutely there's a small percentage of police officers nationwide that shouldn't probably be cops, or who have done things that, you know they end up in prison for, such as, what has gone on with George Floyd, and so forth. But that's a very, very small percentage of officers, and that is not what any officer I've ever known has felt or expressed or would be a part of. And truly, I believe that 99% of us get into this job to help other people. I never expected to be a homicide detective. I mean, everybody always says, "Oh, I want to do, I want to be a homicide detective," and then when you actually get there and you know start working those cases, they can be very difficult. You don't have a victim. I worked sex crimes for a long time as well, and with those, even if they're a child, you still have a victim that has a voice. You still have a victim that hopefully can tell you some things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe there's some witnesses, maybe there's, other things. But in homicide, those victims, they don't have a voice. You are their voice. And it's a huge different ballgame. It's just totally different ballgame when you have no victim that has an ability to tell you anything. And I just hope that, you know, people who do see that there are some bad things that happen in law enforcement can also see on the other side that there are a lot of us, probably, you know, a good 99% of us that are there just to do good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I always throw out the example, I guess, or analogy. I don't know I really call it, but said, imagine if you actually were trying to protect your home, your business, everything from the bad guys, because there are going to be bad guys. I mean, you think about the chaos that, COVID happened just with toilet paper. And, you had people fighting. Typically, they would be just normal shoppers, just, pushing their cart around, getting food together. But when you add on all the stress, I still don't get the whole toilet paper thing, but
yeah, I don't either.
um, but regardless, you think that how fast society will collapse without law and order and without rational thought, that, you take that level of scenario and so if you were to just wipe away all law enforcement right now, so you say everybody just walked off the job, how long would it take before literally we were, locked and loaded on top of our homes, trying to protect our families? And days. I think it would literally be days. And so then, the mentality of some people to not understand and appreciate the fact that they don't have to do that. The fact that they can go to work every day and be able to be productive in whatever it is they do, and typically not have to worry about people coming in and taking whatever it is they find valuable, as opposed, as opposed to literally trying to, like during the George Floyd riots, you remember there were some some people that, like on strip malls and stuff, that were literally locked and loaded, standing on top of the strip mall building, trying to protect their business and their livelihood, and whatever they 40 years worth of their life that they had invested into protecting their and that's all because the law enforcement in that area right there just broke down. And I don't know. I just think it's going to take hopefully not, but in order for some people to actually appreciate, you got to take away everything that they have, and it's kind of like, you don't really appreciate a spouse or something that is really valuable to you until you lose it. So, as sad as it is, but hey, one more question before I let you go. And man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and telling this story. Lecia's case has been a huge MVAC, part of the MVAC story for a long time. And but just in general, you've got experience investigating sexual assaults as well as homicides. As far as overall damage to not just the victim, but the victim's family, uh, subsequent generations, but even neighborhoods and communities. In many ways, I look at like sexual assaults, and because of especially to children, the psychological and the moral and the emotional damage that those crimes cost and cause. Would you agree with me, or do you think homicides are worse?
Uh, ooh. You know, it's really hard for me to say one way or another, but at the same time, I think homicides are worse.
Hmm.
And the only reason I say that is because literally that person is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a victim of a sex assault, or your child is a victim of a sex assault, I don't think that they're any less important than a homicide victim by any stretch. But they're likely still alive. You're still able to see them. You're still able to talk to them. You're still having Christmas together and family holidays or whatever, celebrating their birthdays. But with a homicide victim, they're gone. They're gone. You didn't expect them to be gone. You didn't know they were going to be gone, and then suddenly they're gone, and there's no further communication in any regard, obviously. So I think that really, I think it's worse, unfortunately.
Well, it's both are obviously horrible, and it's sad, really, what humans are capable of doing to other humans. It's the level of just indifference and savagery, and you just look at what some people are capable of doing to someone that they used to, especially like a spouse. It seems like the closer they are in relationship to each other, the more brutal those crimes can get. And it's really sad when you think about people, just reaching the point where they just can't walk away. They have to injure or even murder the person that.
It's called a divorce. Just get a divorce. You know?
So, Hilary, I appreciate you coming on. Is there any last thoughts you want to say about Lecia's case?
I really think technology, the MVAC system is, it's what solved this case. I certainly worked on the case, but I don't feel like I can take credit for solving a case if we didn't, it's the technology, and it's the advancements in these technologies, and it's the willingness of victim witnesses or the victim's family to keep the cases alive or to continue to speak with law enforcement and so forth that to a certain extent gets these cases solved. And although it was absolutely my pleasure to work on the case to find a resolve, if it wasn't for the persistence of the family, the persistence of technology, all of that stuff, I don't think we would ever be able to. We wouldn't be at this point right now with her case. Her case wouldn't have been solved. Because you can guess all you want, but without, and especially the way that juries look at things, if you don't have fingerprints or you don't have DNA, is it real? It certainly was a pleasure to work on the case and be able to be in the process, but it's a combined effort, and I'm just grateful to have been a part of it.
Yeah, well, on that note, we just know that we there are a lot of us out here that really appreciate all of you guys that are in law enforcement and working so hard to solve cases like this. So, Hilary, appreciate it, and I hope you continue enjoying your beautiful Northwest up there. And
absolutely,
thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.